Harold Thompson, a 68-year-old retired postal worker, lived in a 3-bedroom ranch house on Maple Drive in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Following his retirement in 2019, after 32 years of federal service, Harold maintained a predictable routine centered around his home and garden. Neighbors described him as friendly but private, often seen tending to his vegetable garden or reading on his front porch during pleasant weather. Harold's wife of 41 years, Margaret Thompson, had passed away from complications related to diabetes in March 2022. Her death left Harold emotionally devastated and increasingly isolated. According to statements from neighbors and his primary care physician, Harold struggled significantly with depression following Margaret's passing and rarely left his property except for essential errands. Harold's only child, 39-year-old Rebecca Thompson Walsh, lived approximately 20 minutes away in Waterloo with her husband, Michael Walsh, and their 2 teenage children. Rebecca worked as a licensed practical nurse at a rehabilitation facility, while Michael was employed as a shift supervisor at a local manufacturing plant. The family's combined income provided a comfortable middle-class lifestyle, though they carried substantial debt related to their mortgage and 2 vehicle loans. Following Margaret's death, Rebecca assumed increasing responsibility for her father's care and well-being. She visited Harold twice weekly, typically on Wednesdays and Saturdays, to check on his health, assist with household tasks, and provide groceries. These visits had become routine, and Harold relied on them both for practical support and social interaction. During the months following Margaret's funeral, Harold's mental state continued to decline. His primary care physician, Dr. Jennifer Martinez, prescribed antidepressant medication and recommended counseling services. However, Harold was resistant to psychological treatment and inconsistent with his medication regimen. Dr. Martinez noted in her records that Harold frequently expressed feelings of hopelessness and stated that he saw no purpose in continuing without his wife. Rebecca observed these changes in her father's behavior during her regular visits. She reported to her husband Michael that Harold often spoke about Margaret as if she were still alive, setting 2 places at the dinner table and leaving voicemails on Rebecca's phone, asking when Margaret would be coming home. These episodes concerned Rebecca, but Harold's physician advised that such reactions were common among elderly individuals grieving the loss of a long-term spouse. Unknown to Harold, Rebecca and Michael Walsh faced significant financial pressures that had been mounting throughout 2022. Medical bills from Michael's emergency gallbladder surgery in January had exceeded $18,000 after insurance coverage. Their adjustable rate mortgage had increased by nearly $400 per month due to rising interest rates. Additionally, their 15-year-old son required extensive orthodontic treatment costing $6,800, and their 17-year-old daughter was planning to attend college in the fall, necessitating substantial educational expenses. According to bank records later reviewed by investigators, the Walsh family's checking account had been overdrawn multiple times during the summer of 2022. Credit card balances across 4 accounts totaled approximately $28,000. Michael's employer had denied his request for overtime hours, and Rebecca's efforts to secure additional part-time work had been unsuccessful due to her existing schedule and family obligations. During this period, Rebecca became increasingly aware of her father's financial assets. Harold's federal pension provided monthly payments of $2,847, and his savings account contained approximately $87,000 accumulated over decades of careful financial management. Additionally, the Maple Drive property was owned outright, with an estimated value of $145,000, according to recent tax assessments. In conversations with Michael, Rebecca expressed frustration about their financial situation, while acknowledging her father's relative stability. According to statements Michael later provided to investigators, Rebecca began suggesting that Harold's declining mental state might eventually require professional care, which could necessitate liquidating his assets. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. By August 2022, Rebecca had researched Iowa's guardianship laws and procedures for obtaining legal control over an incapacitated person's finances. Browser history recovered from her laptop showed multiple searches for terms including elderly parent financial guardianship, declaring someone mentally incompetent, and power of attorney for dementia patients. The plan that Rebecca developed was methodical and required careful timing. She began by documenting instances of Harold's confusion and depression, taking photographs of his unkempt house, and keeping a journal of his statements about Margaret. These records were intended to support future claims about his declining mental capacity. On September 14, 2022, Rebecca contacted Harold's physician and expressed concerns about his ability to live independently. She requested that Dr. Martinez evaluate Harold for possible dementia or other cognitive disorders. During the subsequent appointment on September 19th, Harold appeared confused and agitated, though medical tests revealed no signs of dementia or significant cognitive impairment beyond depression-related symptoms. Following the medical evaluation, Rebecca began limiting Harold's social contacts and monitoring his communications. She changed his home phone number without his knowledge, redirecting calls to her own phone. She also contacted Harold's few remaining friends and informed them that he was not feeling well and preferred not to receive visitors. The isolation strategy continued for several weeks, during which Harold became increasingly dependent on Rebecca for basic needs. She controlled his access to groceries, medications, and transportation. According to later testimony from neighbors, Harold was observed less frequently outside his home, and his garden, which had been meticulously maintained, began showing signs of neglect. On October 22, 2022, Rebecca implemented the next phase of her plan. She convinced Harold to sign several documents, including a power of attorney agreement and updated will, by telling him they were routine paperwork related to his pension benefits. Harold, trusting his daughter and struggling with depression-related concentration difficulties, signed the documents without fully understanding their implications. The power of attorney gave Rebecca complete control over Harold's finances, including his bank accounts, pension payments, and property decisions. The revised will named Rebecca as the sole beneficiary of Harold's estate, replacing the previous version that had designated portions for local charities that Margaret had supported. With legal control established, Rebecca began transferring Harold's savings to accounts under her control. Bank records show that between October 25th and November 8th, she moved $73,000 from Harold's savings account to a joint account she shared with Michael. These transactions were completed using online banking credentials that Rebecca had obtained during her visits. However, Rebecca's plan required one additional element: Harold's physical disappearance. She could not continue accessing his pension benefits or sell his property while he remained in the house, potentially able to communicate with neighbors or medical professionals. The solution Rebecca devised involved relocating Harold to a location where she could maintain complete control over his circumstances while creating the appearance that he had vanished voluntarily. Rebecca's home on Birch Street in Waterloo included a finished basement that had previously served as a recreation room for her children. The space contained a bathroom, small kitchenette, and separate exterior entrance that could be accessed without going through the main house. During late October 2022, Rebecca and Michael converted this area into what they described to their children as a temporary guest suite. On November 12, 2022, Rebecca visited Harold as usual for their Saturday routine. She informed him that she had arranged for him to stay at her house temporarily while his home underwent necessary repairs. Harold, who had become increasingly passive and dependent on Rebecca's guidance, agreed to accompany her. Rebecca packed a small bag with Harold's clothing and personal items, then drove him to her residence in Waterloo. She led him to the basement area and explained that this would be his room during the repair period. Harold expressed some confusion about the arrangement, but did not resist. Once Harold was situated in the basement, Rebecca secured the exterior door with multiple locks and informed him that the locks were for security purposes due to recent break-ins in the neighborhood. She provided Harold with basic food supplies and told him she would return daily to check on his needs. The basement confinement began as a supposedly temporary arrangement, but Rebecca made no efforts to return Harold to his own home. Instead, she used his absence to accelerate her financial activities and begin preparing for the next phase of her deception. 3 days after relocating Harold to the basement, Rebecca contacted the Cedar Falls Police Department to report her father missing. During the initial report, filed on November 15, 2022, Rebecca stated that she had arrived for her regular Saturday visit to find Harold's house empty, with no indication of his whereabouts. Rebecca provided investigators with a detailed account of Harold's recent behavior, emphasizing his depression, confusion, and statements about wanting to be reunited with his deceased wife. She suggested that Harold might have wandered away from home in a confused state or possibly harmed himself due to his grief. The missing person report initiated a standard investigation protocol. Cedar Falls police officers searched Harold's property and interviewed neighbors about recent sightings. Several residents confirmed that Harold had become increasingly reclusive following his wife's death, but no one reported seeing him leave the property or observing any suspicious activity. Detective Lisa Chang, assigned to the missing person case, noted that Harold's house showed no signs of forced entry or struggle. His medications were present, and his wallet and identification remained in the home. However, some clothing and personal items appeared to be missing, suggesting that Harold might have packed a bag before leaving. During the investigation, Rebecca provided additional information intended to support the theory that Harold had left voluntarily. She claimed that Harold had recently spoken about visiting locations that held memories of his life with Margaret, including a lake in Minnesota where they had honeymooned and a cabin in Wisconsin where they had vacationed regularly. Based on Rebecca's statements, the search for Harold expanded to include these locations. Iowa Department of Public Safety issued a silver alert, and Harold's information was entered into national missing person databases. His photograph was circulated to law enforcement agencies in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and surrounding states. Meanwhile, Harold remained confined in Rebecca's basement, unaware that he was the subject of an extensive search operation. Rebecca maintained minimal contact with him, providing food and basic necessities while ensuring he remained isolated from any outside contact. During the weeks following the missing person report, Rebecca accelerated her efforts to liquidate Harold's remaining assets. She contacted a real estate agent about selling the Maple Drive property, explaining that her father had decided to relocate to a care facility. The house was listed for sale on December 3, 2022, with an asking price of $149,000. Rebecca also began redirecting Harold's pension payments to her own bank account, using the power of attorney documentation. Social Security Administration records show that she completed change of address forms indicating that Harold had moved to her residence, though she did not disclose his actual location in the basement. The deception continued successfully for several months. Rebecca maintained regular communication with Detective Chong, expressing concern about her father's welfare and appreciation for the ongoing search efforts. She provided additional suggestions about locations Harold might have visited and offered to pay for expanded search activities. However, Harold's physical and mental condition in the basement began deteriorating significantly. The confined space, lack of natural light, and social isolation exacerbated his existing depression. According to medical evidence later presented at trial, Harold lost approximately 30 pounds during his confinement and developed symptoms consistent with prolonged psychological stress. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more shocking true crime stories. Let us know in the comments what you think should have been the first red flag that something wasn't right about Rebecca's story. By March 2023, Harold's declining health created practical problems for Rebecca's continued deception. She recognized that his deteriorating condition might eventually require medical intervention, which would expose her scheme. Additionally, the stress of maintaining the elaborate lie while caring for a confined person was affecting her own mental state and family relationships. The resolution came unexpectedly through Harold's own actions. On April 8, 2023, during one of Rebecca's daily visits to provide food, Harold managed to push past her as she unlocked the basement door. Despite his weakened condition, he ran toward the street while calling for help. Michael Walsh, who was present in the yard, attempted to restrain Harold and bring him back to the house. However, a neighbor walking her dog observed the altercation and became suspicious when she heard Harold shouting that he was being held against his will. The neighbor, Janet Martinez, immediately called 911 to report what appeared to be an elderly man being forcibly restrained outside the Walsh residence. Waterloo police responded within minutes and found Harold in an obviously distressed state, claiming that he had been locked in a basement for months. Officers initially suspected that Harold might be experiencing a mental health crisis, given his disheveled appearance and seemingly improbable claims. However, His detailed knowledge of current events and ability to provide consistent information about his circumstances suggested that his account might be accurate. Rebecca attempted to convince the responding officers that her father was suffering from dementia and had become confused about his living situation. She claimed that Harold was staying with her voluntarily while receiving care for his mental health condition, and that his statements about confinement were delusions related to his psychiatric disorder. However, when officers inspected the basement area, they discovered evidence that supported Harold's account. The space had been modified with additional locks, and Harold's personal belongings were arranged in a manner consistent with long-term occupancy. Additionally, Harold was able to provide specific details about his confinement that would have been difficult to fabricate. Detective Chang was contacted immediately when officers realized the missing person case might be connected to the current situation. Harold was transported to a local hospital for medical evaluation, where physicians confirmed that his physical condition was consistent with prolonged confinement and poor nutrition. The investigation into Harold's disappearance was reopened with a focus on Rebecca's role in his confinement. Financial records revealed the unauthorized transfers from Harold's accounts, and the timeline of these transactions corresponded with his reported disappearance date. During questioning, Rebecca initially maintained that Harold had been staying with her voluntarily, and that his claims of imprisonment were symptoms of mental illness. However, when confronted with financial evidence and Harold's detailed account of his confinement, she requested legal counsel and declined to provide further statements. Michael Walsh admitted to knowledge of Harold's presence in their basement, but claimed that Rebecca had convinced him it was a temporary arrangement for Harold's own safety. He stated that he believed Harold was confused and potentially dangerous to himself, and that Rebecca was acting in her father's best interests. The investigation expanded to include examination of Rebecca's internet search history, financial transactions, and communications with various agencies. Evidence revealed the systematic nature of her deception, including the fraudulent power of attorney documents and unauthorized redirection of Harold's benefits. Harold's medical evaluation confirmed that he had suffered significant physical and psychological harm during his confinement, but that he retained full mental capacity and had never required the level of intervention Rebecca had claimed. His depression, while genuine, had not impaired his ability to make decisions about his own care or living arrangements. On April 20th, 2023, Rebecca Thompson Walsh was arrested and charged with kidnapping, financial exploitation of an elderly person, fraud, and filing false police reports. Michael Walsh was charged with conspiracy and accessory after the fact for his role in maintaining Harold's confinement. The trial of Rebecca Thompson Walsh began in Black Hawk County District Court in September 2023. Prosecutors presented evidence of Rebecca's elaborate scheme to gain control of her father's assets through fraudulent confinement and deception of law enforcement. Harold testified about his experience during the months of basement confinement, describing the psychological impact of isolation and his growing realization that his daughter had no intention of returning him to his own home. His testimony was clear and detailed, contradicting Rebecca's claims about his mental incapacity. Financial experts testified about the unauthorized transfers from Harold's accounts and the pattern of transactions that coincided with his disappearance. The evidence showed that Rebecca had systematically liquidated his assets while maintaining the pretense of searching for him. Rebecca's defense attorney argued that her actions were motivated by genuine concern for her father's welfare rather than financial gain. The defense claimed that Harold's depression and confusion had created legitimate safety concerns that justified temporary intervention. However, the prosecution successfully demonstrated that Rebecca's actions exceeded any reasonable standard of care and were primarily motivated by her own financial difficulties rather than Harold's needs. The elaborate nature of the deception, including the false missing person report and systematic asset liquidation, contradicted claims of good intentions. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all major charges. Rebecca was sentenced to 12 years in state prison, with possibility of parole after 8 years. Michael Walsh received a sentence of 4 years, with possibility of parole after 2 years. Harold Thompson returned to his home on Maple Drive following the trial's conclusion. The real estate sale was canceled, and his remaining assets were restored to his control. He received ongoing medical care to address the physical and psychological effects of his confinement, and began working with a therapist to process the trauma of his daughter's betrayal. The case prompted Iowa authorities to review procedures for processing missing person reports involving elderly individuals, particularly when family members are the primary sources of information about the disappearance. Additional safeguards were implemented to prevent similar cases of exploitation disguised as caregiving. Harold Thompson continues to live independently in Cedar Falls, though he maintains minimal contact with extended family members. Neighbors report that he has gradually resumed some of his previous routines, including gardening, though he remains more cautious about trusting others than he was before his ordeal. Rebecca Thompson Walsh is currently serving her sentence at the Iowa Correctional Institution for Women. She will be eligible for parole consideration in 2031. Her children, who were unaware of their mother's actions regarding their grandfather, have maintained contact with Harold and have expressed support for his recovery. The basement area where Harold was confined has been completely renovated by the new owners of the Walsh property, which was sold following Michael's conviction. The case remains one of the most unusual instances of familial exploitation and deception in Iowa's recent criminal history.